Alex sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the large bay window of his luxury apartment. The city skyline sparkled under the evening sky, but despite the beauty, it felt distant, almost sterile. His life had always been this way, lavish, comfortable, but somehow hollow. At 28, Alex had everything anyone could dream of: a successful career in finance, a lavish home, and all the material possessions money could buy. But no matter how much he achieved, the gnawing feeling of emptiness remained. It wasn't the lack of relationships. He had plenty of people around him. It wasn't even the void left by his parents' strict but loving presence, constantly reminding him of a legacy he had to uphold. There was something else, something deeper. Alex had always felt like an outsider in his own family, as if he didn't belong. His parents, while caring, never truly opened up emotionally. They loved him, yes, but their affection was more of an obligation than a connection. They raised him with everything a child could need, except answers to the questions he was too afraid to ask. He brushed off the strange feelings, as he often did, and picked up his phone. A notification buzzed, a message from Sarah, his closest friend. She had a way of sensing when something was off with him. Alex smiled softly. At least someone could see past the polished facade he wore so well. "Are we still on for dinner tomorrow?" she texted. Alex quickly replied with a yes and put the phone down, but his mind wandered back to the thoughts he couldn't shake. Something was missing. He just didn't know what. Across the apartment, a photo of his parents stared back at him from the mantel. They had provided him with a life most could only dream of. Yet, in their eyes, there was always something guarded, a truth they weren't willing to share. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than what they'd told him. Far away, in a small, run-down house on the edge of a quiet town, Leo wiped the sweat from his brow as he loaded boxes into the back of an old truck. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Leo hardly noticed. Physical labor had become second nature to him over the years. He lived a life vastly different from Alex's, modest, struggling, but filled with warmth. His adoptive mother had been his only constant. She was a kind woman, always doing her best despite their limited means. But now, with her health in decline, Leo carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. They didn't have much, just enough to scrape by. He worked multiple jobs to cover the medical bills piling up on their kitchen table. Every day was a battle against time, money, and the fear of losing her. Despite it all, Leo never complained. His mother had given him everything she could, and he intended to do the same for her. As he closed the truck's back door, he looked up at the small, weathered house. It wasn't much, but it was home. His mother's frail figure could be seen through the kitchen window, carefully preparing their meager dinner. She was sick, yet she refused to stop working. That was the woman she was, determined, strong, and selfless. Still, Leo knew she wouldn't be able to keep going much longer. The thought crushed him. He couldn't bear the idea of losing her, the one person who had stood by him no matter what. He was scared of the future, scared of what came next. More than anything, though, he was scared of the loneliness that he sensed would follow her passing. There was an ache inside him, too, an emptiness, similar to what Alex felt, though he could never put his finger on it. Leo loved his mother, but deep down, there was always a nagging question about who he really was, where he came from, why he had never felt whole. Leo stood over the small bed where his adoptive mother lay, her once vibrant energy now reduced to a whisper of its former self. The room smelled faintly of lavender, the scent she always loved. It was a modest room in a modest house, but it was full of memories that were now slipping away from him. Her hand trembled as she reached out to him, and Leo gently took it, feeling the frailty in her grip. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered, her breath shaky. Leo leaned in closer, trying to catch every word. She struggled to speak, her voice breaking. "In my room, in the drawer. There's something you need to see." Leo frowned but nodded. He had no idea what she was referring to, but he promised her he would look. After a long silence, her hand fell limp, and her breath stilled. His heart sank. The grief hit him instantly, flooding his senses. His mother was gone, the one person who had always been there for him, who had given him a sense of family, was no longer with him. Later, as Leo sat alone in the quiet house, he remembered her words. With heavy steps, he went into her bedroom, a place filled with her soft touches, handmade curtains, photographs from better days, and a wooden dresser with faded paint. Opening the top drawer, he sifted through old keepsakes, faded letters, trinkets from the past, until he found a small, leather-bound journal. It was worn and fragile, as if it had been tucked away for years. His mother's handwriting sprawled across the pages, shaky but still recognizable. As he began reading, Leo's heart pounded. The entries described how she had come to adopt him, but there was something else, something she had never told him. His eyes widened as he read the final, cryptic lines. "I couldn't bear to tell you the truth. There was another child, a brother. You were never meant to be alone." The words hit Leo like a thunderbolt. A brother. How could this be true? All his life, he had believed he was an only child, that his mother had been his sole family. Now, with her gone, he was left with more questions than ever. Who was his brother? And why had they been separated? On the other side of the city, Alex sat at his kitchen table, staring at the envelope in front of him. It was old, weathered, and had no return address. He hesitated before tearing it open, unsure of what he would find. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written on it. "You've been living a lie. You were adopted, but not alone. There is another, a brother. Find him before it's too late." Alex's breath caught in his throat. A brother. He had never been told anything about a sibling. His parents had never mentioned anyone else being part of the adoption. Why hadn't they told him? The words on the page haunted him. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't focus during dinner with Sarah. He was completely consumed by the letter's message. His family had always been somewhat secretive, but this, a hidden brother, it felt unreal. The next morning, he made a decision. He couldn't just ignore this. He needed answers. His parents had always been vague about his adoption, never fully explaining the details. Now he realized they had been hiding something far more significant than he had imagined. Later that evening, Alex confronted his parents. His father, always the stoic figure, looked away when Alex mentioned the letter. His mother's face paled. "Why didn't you tell me?" Alex demanded, his voice tinged with anger. "I have a right to know." His mother's lips trembled as she replied, "It wasn't meant to be this way. We didn't want to hurt you. You were supposed to have a different life." "What life?" "One where I never knew I had a brother." Alex's words were sharp. He could feel the walls of trust breaking down around him. His father, silent until now, finally spoke. "It's not that simple, Alex. There are things you don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Alex shot back, frustrated. "I deserve the truth." His parents exchanged a long, weary glance. They told him that when they adopted him, there had been another child, another boy. But for reasons they wouldn't fully disclose, the boys had been separated. The adoption agency had kept it quiet, and they had followed suit. Alex's hands trembled with a mix of rage and disbelief. A brother, out there, somewhere. And all these years, he had been kept in the dark. The wind howled through the narrow streets as Leo walked to the only cafe still open in his small town. He clutched the worn journal tightly, as if afraid it might slip from his grasp, and with it, all the answers he desperately needed. His mother's words echoed in his mind. A brother. The thought consumed him. Somewhere, out in the world, was a person who shared his blood, who might understand the emptiness he had always felt. He sat at a small table by the window, barely noticing the steaming cup of coffee placed in front of him. Leo stared down at the journal, flipping through the pages he had already read. The entries were sparse, written by a woman who had kept so much hidden. She had protected him, but at what cost? His mother had been his everything, yet she had also been the one to withhold the truth. The journal mentioned a name, a social worker who had been involved in the adoption. She was older now, retired, but still lived in a nearby town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Leo stood abruptly, making up his mind. He would find this woman. He would ask the questions his mother never had the chance to answer. Across the city, Alex sat in his apartment, staring blankly at his computer screen. He had tried to distract himself with work, but the words on the letter kept replaying in his mind. A brother. It was impossible to concentrate on anything else. Sarah's voice cut through his haze. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, sitting down across from him. Alex blinked, realizing he hadn't heard a word she had been saying. He looked at her, seeing the concern in her eyes. She had been his best friend for years, the one person he could always count on. But how could he even begin to explain this? "I'm fine," Alex lied, but his voice faltered. Sarah leaned in, narrowing her eyes. "Don't give me that. Something's off." For a moment, Alex considered brushing it off, pretending everything was normal. But the weight of the truth was too heavy. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I got a letter from someone. They said I have a brother. A brother I never knew about." Sarah's eyes widened. "What? That's insane. Are you sure it's real?" "I don't know," Alex admitted. "But my parents, they didn't deny it. They said it was complicated, that there were things I didn't understand." His voice grew bitter. "They've been hiding this from me my whole life." Sarah shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "Why would they do that?" "I have no idea," Alex said, feeling the frustration rise in him again. "But I need to find out. I need to know who he is." Leo stood outside the small, weathered house on the edge of town, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He had tracked down the woman mentioned in the journal, a former social worker named Mrs. Harding, who had been involved in his adoption all those years ago. Now, standing on her doorstep, he wondered what she would reveal. The door creaked open, and an elderly woman peered out. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Harding?" Leo asked cautiously. "My name is Leo, and I believe you were involved in my adoption. I found a journal, my mother's journal. She mentioned you." The woman's eyes softened, and after a brief pause, she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Leo followed her into the modest living room, where the smell of old books filled the air. The walls were lined with shelves of photographs, mementos of a long life. Mrs. Harding motioned for him to sit. "I remember your case," she said quietly. "I was young then, just starting out as a social worker. You and your brother were both in the system at the same time." Leo's heart skipped a beat. "My brother. So it's true." Mrs. Harding nodded. "Yes. You two were adopted separately. It wasn't uncommon back then. Families often couldn't take in more than one child, and the system, it wasn't always fair. Your adoptive mother didn't know where your brother ended up. It was all kept very quiet." Leo sat back, his mind racing. "Do you know where he is now? What happened to him?" The old woman hesitated, her face clouding with regret. "I wish I could tell you. I've been out of the system for decades. The last I heard, he was adopted by a wealthy family, but I don't know where they are now." Disappointment surged through Leo, but he refused to give up. "Is there anything else? Any records, names, something I can use to find him?" Mrs. Harding sighed. "There might be some old records in storage. I'll look into it, but it could take some time." Leo nodded, his determination unwavering. "Thank you. I'll wait." As he left her house, a new sense of purpose filled him. He wasn't alone. His brother was out there somewhere, and he wouldn't stop until he found him. Alex sat in the cold silence of his parents' living room, the weight of their secrets suffocating the air around him. His mother had retreated to the kitchen, unwilling to continue the conversation. His father, however, sat across from him, his eyes hard and unreadable. "You've been lying to me my whole life," Alex said, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "Why? Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" His father shifted in his seat, but remained calm. "We did what we thought was best for you. You were never meant to know. Never meant to know." Alex's voice rose. "You had no right to make that decision for me. I deserved to know I had a brother." His father's gaze turned icy. "It's not as simple as you think, Alex. There were circumstances, things we couldn't control. The adoption agency made the decision, not us. We did what we could, But in the end, it wasn't our choice. Alex shook his head, unable to process what he was hearing. So you just let them separate us? We didn't have a choice, his father repeated, his tone firm. But we gave you everything, Alex. A life, an education, opportunities. Your brother, he was sent elsewhere. Where? Alex asked, the desperation clear in his voice. Where did he go? His father looked away, avoiding his gaze. We don't know. The agency was very secretive about the whole process. They didn't tell us where he ended up. Alex felt a surge of frustration. It seemed like every question led to more uncertainty, more walls blocking him from the truth. But one thing was clear. His family had lied to him, and now he needed to find out the truth on his own. Standing up, Alex looked down at his father, who still refused to meet his eyes. I'm going to find him, Alex said, his voice steady. No matter what it takes. He didn't wait for a response as he walked out the door, his mind racing with the possibilities. Somewhere, his brother was out there, living a life completely separate from his own. And now, more than ever, Alex was determined to bridge the gap that had been forced between them. Leo paced anxiously across the worn floorboards of his small living room, waiting for the call from Mrs. Harding. The minutes stretched into hours as he replayed their conversation in his mind. His brother was out there, a brother he had never known, but someone who had always been part of him. The ringing phone startled him out of his thoughts. He grabbed it quickly, heart pounding. Leo's. Mrs. Harding's voice crackled through the line. I found something. His pulse quickened. What is it? I went through the old records, she said. There wasn't much, but I found a name. Alex Carter. He was adopted by a wealthy family in the city, just as I thought. Leo froze. The name felt foreign, yet somehow familiar, as if it had always been lingering at the edge of his consciousness. Do you know where he is now? I'm afraid I don't, Mrs. Harding replied. But it's a start. You can look him up, maybe track him down. I'm sorry I couldn't find more. Leo's hand tightened around the phone. Thank you, he said quietly. This means more than you know. As he hung up, Leo's mind raced. The city wasn't far, but it was a world apart from the life he knew. He had no idea who this Alex Carter was, or what kind of life he led. But that didn't matter. He needed to find him. The next day, Leo packed a small bag and left for the city. The journey was long and unfamiliar, the bustling streets overwhelming after the quiet simplicity of his small town. But Leo didn't care. He was driven by something stronger than fear, an unshakable determination to find his brother. After hours of searching online, he found the name Alex Carter linked to a finance company. His pulse quickened again. This had to be him. Armed with nothing but the name and an address, Leo stood outside a towering skyscraper, feeling like an outsider in a world of glass and steel. But this was the moment he had been waiting for. His heart pounded as he walked through the revolving doors, ready to confront the truth. The air inside the towering skyscraper was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the street outside. Leo stood in the lobby, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt out of place among the sharply dressed businessmen and women who hurried past him, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. But he didn't care. He was here for one reason: to find Alex Carter. Leo walked up to the reception desk, trying to calm his nerves. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Alex Carter," he said, his voice wavering slightly. The receptionist gave him a quick glance before typing something into the computer. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, not looking up. "No," Leo admitted, "but it's important. Could you please let him know I'm here?" The receptionist raised an eyebrow but nodded. One moment. As Leo waited, the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. He had no idea how Alex would react to seeing him, or if Alex even knew about him at all. The uncertainty gnawed at him. After what felt like forever, the receptionist looked up. "Mr. Carter is busy at the moment, but he has a few minutes to meet with you. Take the elevator to the 23rd floor." Leo's heart raced as he followed the instructions, stepping into the sleek elevator and watching the numbers light up one by one. He didn't know what to expect when those doors opened, but he had to know the truth. When the elevator doors slid open, Leo stepped out into a gleaming hallway. His palms were sweaty, but he forced himself to walk forward. He stopped in front of a large glass office door with Alex Carter engraved in elegant letters. Taking a deep breath, Leo knocked. The door opened, and there stood Alex, a man who looked so much like him. It was as if he were staring into a mirror. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged with the weight of their shared history, though they were strangers. Alex. Leo's voice was soft, uncertain. Alex's eyes widened, and for a brief second, there was recognition. But it was quickly replaced with confusion, even disbelief. "Who are you?" Alex asked, his voice guarded. Leo swallowed hard. "My name is Leo, and I think I'm your brother." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Alex stared at Leo, his mind reeling. He had spent the past few days obsessing over the letter he'd received, over the secrets his parents had kept from him, and now this man, this stranger, was standing in front of him claiming to be his brother. It felt surreal. "Brother," Alex echoed, still processing the situation. His hands tightened into fists, not in anger, but in sheer disbelief. Leo nodded, his gaze steady. "I know this is a lot. I found out recently myself about you. My mother left me a journal before she passed away. She wrote about the adoption, about how there was another child, another boy. I've been looking for you ever since." Alex's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real. The hidden pieces of his life were suddenly coming together, but it felt too abrupt, too overwhelming. He stepped back, his expression hardening. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Leo took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket to pull out the journal. He handed it to Alex with trembling hands. "Here, it's all in there. Read it, and you'll see." Alex hesitated for a moment before taking the journal. His eyes scanned the pages, and as he read, the truth became undeniable. The writing was shaky, but the details were clear. Two boys separated at birth, adopted into different worlds. He flipped through the entries, feeling the weight of each word. "I didn't know," Alex muttered, almost to himself. "I didn't know any of this." Leo watched him closely. "Neither did I. My mother never told me until she was on her deathbed. She kept it a secret to protect me, I think. But when I found out, I had to come find you." Alex looked up from the journal, his emotions a whirlwind. Anger, confusion, relief. They all warred within him. "Why now? Why didn't she tell you sooner?" "I don't know," Leo admitted, his voice strained. "But I'm here now. We're here now." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, grappling with the gravity of the situation. Their lives had been split in two, but now the pieces were slowly coming back together. Alex's mind raced, still trying to wrap itself around the reality of all. "I've spent my entire life feeling like something was missing," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. "And now I know why." Leo nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. "Me too." But before they could delve deeper into the conversation, the door to Alex's office swung open. Sarah stood in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the scene before her. "Alex, she started, then froze when she saw Leo. Her gaze darted between the two men, recognition dawning on her face. "What's going on here?" Alex swallowed hard, unsure how to explain. "This is Leo, my brother." Sarah's mouth dropped open, and she took a step back, clearly overwhelmed. "Your brother? I thought you didn't have a brother." "Yeah," Alex said, rubbing the back of his neck. "So did I." The silence in the office was thick, and Alex could feel the weight of both Leo's and Sarah's eyes on him. His mind swirled, trying to grasp the full gravity of the situation. He had spent days preparing for this moment, but no amount of mental rehearsing could have prepared him for the reality of it. Leo, standing in front of him, wasn't just an idea anymore. He was real. Flesh and blood. Sarah shifted awkwardly, breaking the silence. I'll give you two some space," she muttered, turning to leave. "No," Alex called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Stay. I want you to hear this." Sarah hesitated but nodded, stepping back inside the room and closing the door behind her. She glanced at Leo with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension before focusing back on Alex. Alex swallowed, gathering his thoughts before speaking. Leo, I've been looking for answers too. My whole life. I've felt like something was off, like I didn't belong with my parents. And now, finding out about you, it's a lot. But I need to understand why. Why were we separated? Why didn't anyone tell me the truth? Leo let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. I don't know the full story either. All I know is what my mother wrote in her journal. She didn't even tell me while she was alive. I only found out after she passed away. His voice wavered with the memory. She always did her best for me, but I think she was protecting me from something. Alex nodded, his frustration bubbling to the surface again. I confronted my parents about it, but they weren't exactly forthcoming. They claimed the adoption agency made the decision to separate us, but that doesn't make sense. There has to be more to it. Leo's face hardened with determination. I agree. I don't believe it was just the agency. There's something they're not telling us. Alex clenched his jaw, and I'm going to find out what it is. The room fell silent again, the two brothers locking eyes. There was an unspoken bond between them, one forged not by shared memories, but by the same nagging emptiness they had felt all their lives. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words, an understanding that they were both broken pieces of a larger puzzle. Sarah, sensing the moment, finally spoke up. So, what happens now? Are you two going to try to figure this out together? Leo looked at Alex, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I don't know. I didn't come here with a plan. I just wanted to meet him, to know he was real. Alex nodded slowly, then took a deep breath. Well, now you've met me, and I've met you, but this isn't over. There's more we need to know. Leo shifted uncomfortably. And what about your parents? Do you think they'll tell us more if we press them? Alex exhaled. I doubt it, but there's one other person who might have answers. Later that evening, Leo and Alex sat in a dimly lit cafe, their faces cast in shadows as they spoke quietly over steaming cups of coffee. The air between them was still thick with the gravity of their newfound relationship, but it was also charged with purpose. Both of them were now united by one goal, uncovering the truth about their separation. The person I'm talking about is Ethan, Alex said, leaning forward, his voice low. He's been a part of my parents' inner circle for years. I always thought of him as just a family friend, but now I'm starting to wonder. He knows more than he lets on. Leo frowned, his brow furrowed. Do you trust him? Alex shook his head. No, not anymore. But he might be the only one who can give us the answers we need. He's been around since the adoption happened, and I have a feeling he's been involved in more than just business dealings with my family. Leo nodded slowly, absorbing the information. So, what's the plans? We confront him, Alex said, his eyes narrowing. We get him alone, make him tell us what he knows. Leo leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. And if he refuses? Alex's jaw clenched. Then we make him talk. Leo wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but he understood the desperation in Alex's voice. It mirrored his own. He had spent his whole life feeling lost, and now that he was close to the truth, he wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. The next day, Alex arranged a private meeting with Ethan. It wasn't difficult. Ethan had always been fond of Alex, acting almost like a second father figure to him over the years. But now, Alex saw him in a different light. If Ethan had played any part in keeping the brothers apart, there would be consequences. Leo followed Alex into the private study where Ethan waited. The older man was seated comfortably in an armchair, his demeanor relaxed. But when he saw Leo, his expression faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. Alex, Ethan greeted warmly, though his eyes flicked nervously toward Leo. And who's this? Alex didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is Leo, my brother. Ethan's smile wavered, and he cleared his throat. Brother, I didn't know you had a brother. Don't lie to me, Alex said sharply, his tone colder than Ethan had ever heard. We know about the adoption. We know we were separated, and we know you were there. So start talking. Ethan's expression hardened, the mask of warmth slipping away. He leaned back in his chair, considering his next words carefully. "You don't know what you're asking, Alex." "I'm asking for the truth," Alex snapped. "No more lies. No more games." "What happened? Why were we separated?" For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, and Leo could feel the air growing heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Ethan sighed. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," he said quietly. "But your parents, they had their reasons." "What reasons?" Alex demanded. Ethan hesitated. "They wanted to protect their legacy. They thought if they adopted 2 boys, it would complicate things. There were issues with the family name, the inheritance. They didn't want to risk a power struggle between you two. So they made a deal with the agency." Leo's heart sank. It was all about power, about status. Their separation hadn't been some tragic accident. It had been a deliberate choice. Alex's face was a mask of controlled fury. "So they threw us away to protect their fortune." Ethan nodded slowly. "They believed it was the right thing to do. They thought you'd both be better off apart." Leo couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had spent his life struggling, while Alex had been living in luxury, all because of a decision made out of greed. Alex stood abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. "We're done here." Without another word, he stormed out of the room, with Leo following close behind. They had their answers, but the truth felt more like a curse than a blessing. The days following their meeting with Ethan felt like a blur for Alex and Leo. The truth about their separation hung over them like a dark cloud, and though they had gotten the answers they sought, the weight of that knowledge left them both reeling. The revelation of their adoptive parents' decision, made purely for selfish reasons, cut deeper than they had expected. Alex had spent his life believing in his family's love, in the legacy they had groomed him for. But now, that legacy was tainted, and the people he had trusted had proven themselves to be driven by greed and control. And Leo, he had grown up struggling, wondering why he never quite felt whole, and now he knew. He had been discarded for the sake of convenience. The brothers knew one thing: they couldn't let this go unanswered. The world their parents had built was based on a lie, and they were determined to bring that lie crashing down. In the grand dining room of his family's estate, Alex paced back and forth, his mind racing. Leo stood by the window, staring out at the expansive grounds, feeling the surreal nature of all. This mansion, this life. None of it was his, but it had been his brother's for decades. They were 2 sides of the same coin, separated by wealth and circumstance. "We have to confront them," Alex said finally, his voice steely with resolve. "They need to face what they did." Leo turned to face him, nodding. "I agree. But do you really think they'll admit to it? They've been hiding this for years." "They don't have a choice anymore," Alex replied. "I'm not giving them one." That evening, they confronted their parents in the opulent living room of the estate. Alex's father sat in his usual armchair, his face a mask of calm, while his mother sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. But there was an unease in the room, a tension that couldn't be ignored. Alex and Leo stood together, side by side, a united front. "We know everything," Alex began, his voice cold. "About the adoption, about Leo, about why you kept us apart." His mother's eyes widened, and his father's jaw tightened. But neither of them spoke. "You did this to protect your name," Alex continued, his anger rising. "To protect your fortune. And you threw Leo away in the process." His father's gaze hardened. "We did what we thought was best." "Best for who?" Alex snapped. "Best for us, or best for you?" Leo, standing silently until now, stepped forward. "I grew up struggling while Alex lived in luxury. You made that choice for us. You decided that I didn't deserve the same opportunities." "Why?" "Because I was inconvenient." His mother's face crumpled with guilt, but his father remained unmoved. "It wasn't about convenience, Leo. It was about the future, about ensuring that the family name remained intact." "Family name?" Alex spat. "You sacrificed us for the sake of a name. You don't even know what family means." The room was filled with a heavy silence. His mother, her voice trembling, finally spoke. We didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," Leo replied, his voice steady but full of pain. "You hurt both of us." Alex's father stood up, his posture rigid. "This conversation is over. You've had your answers. Now it's time to move on." "No," Alex said, his voice low but dangerous. "It's not over. It won't be over until everyone knows what you did." His father's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly do you think you'll accomplish by dragging this out into the open?" "You'll destroy everything." Alex met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen." In the days that followed, Alex and Leo made good on their promise. The story of their separation, of the decisions their parents had made, was exposed, and the truth sent shockwaves through the community. The Carter family, once untouchable, was now embroiled in scandal. The reputation they had worked so hard to protect was shattered. Alex's decision to expose the truth wasn't easy. He knew it would come at a cost. His parents would never forgive him, and the legacy he had been groomed to inherit was now tarnished beyond repair. But none of that mattered anymore. For the first time in his life, Alex felt free from the expectations, the lies, and the weight of a legacy that had never truly been his. As for Leo, the exposure of the truth didn't change his past, but it did give him closure. He had always wondered why he felt incomplete, and now he knew. The knowledge that he hadn't been abandoned by some cruel twist of fate, but by the calculated decisions of people driven by greed, gave him a sense of peace. It wasn't the outcome he had imagined, but it was the truth, and that was enough. The brothers, once strangers, had found each other again. Their relationship wasn't perfect. How could it be, after a lifetime apart? But they had forged a new bond, one built on trust and understanding. They weren't the same people they had been before, and neither of them would ever forget the pain of their separation. But they had a future now, together, and that was all that mattered. On a quiet evening, weeks after the dust had settled, Alex and Leo stood together on the balcony of Alex's apartment, looking out at the city skyline. "It's strange," Alex said quietly, "how everything we thought we knew was just gone." Leo nodded. "Yeah, but maybe that's a good thing." Alex glanced at his brother, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, maybe it is." They stood there for a while, in comfortable silence, two brothers who had found their way back to each other against all odds. The past was behind them, and the future, whatever it held, was theirs to face together. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like to support the channel. We'd love to hear what part of the story had the most impact on you. Was it the brothers' emotional reunion, the shocking family secrets, or the intense final confrontation? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget, your voice matters. If you have any story suggestions or ideas for future videos, we'd love to hear them. What kind of stories would you like to see next? Share your thoughts, and we might turn your idea into our next video.